2 years ago, Baker Mayfield helped the Cleveland Browns to their first playoff win since 1994. Last season, Baker made a career-altering decision that has led to what could be the end of his career, at least as a starter. It led to him losing millions of dollars, getting traded to the Panthers, and now finding himself as a backup quarterback in Carolina. It's over for Baker Mayfield. Mayfield was traded to the Panthers for a 5th rounder. Carolina needed some kind of answer at quarterback and wanted to pit Baker against Sam Darnold for the starting job. Well, Baker ended up winning the competition, and it went poorly. I mean, very poorly. In 5 games, Mayfield threw for less than 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. The stats were bad, but the play on the field was even worse. PFF has 38 quarterbacks this season that have been graded out. Baker Mayfield is dead last. He's been the worst quarterback in the league. Baker suffered a high ankle sprain in week 5, and unlike last season, he shut it down. But he isn't getting his starting job back. The day after his injury, the Panthers fired head coach Matt Rule. Steve Wilks is the interim, and he's going to rock with PJ Walker. I think it's worth noting that it's not out of the realm of possibility that Mayfield plays again this year. I mean, Sam Darnold and Matt Corral are both on injured reserve. That means Baker is one PJ Walker injury away from starting. But unless that happens, it's hard to know whether or not we'll ever see Baker Mayfield start in the NFL again. Looking back, it sort of feels like Baker Mayfield was always destined to fail in the NFL, and that was only delayed thanks to the elite team around him at times in Cleveland. Baker was one of those interesting first overall picks that was successful in college and had all of the intangibles, but didn't have the raw talent. Oklahoma had a tailor-made scheme for Baker to succeed in, and as long as he was good in a scheme that fit him, Baker was going to have some level of success, and he did with the Browns. But more than anything, his intangibles really showed. Cleveland was a losing franchise. They went 1-31 in the 2 seasons before selecting Baker. Well, he really did help change the culture. He passed for 3,700 yards and 27 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. It was promising, and better than anything the Browns had had at the position in a long time. Baker had a rough sophomore slump though. 3,800 yards and 22 touchdowns to a staggering 21 interceptions. He didn't always look the best in his first 2 years in Cleveland, but there were some flashes. And most importantly, there was an excuse and a lot of issues the Browns were working through at the time. Baker played for 4 different head coaches in his first 3 seasons in Cleveland. He was drafted by Hugh Jackson, who got fired midway through his rookie season. Greg Williams was the interim head coach, and that offseason, Cleveland hired Freddie Kitchens, who, well, sucked and was fired after 1 year. Finally, Cleveland hired Kevin Stefanski, and all it took was 1 season under him to turn the Browns into a playoff team. Not only that, but Cleveland won a postseason game for the first time since 1994. Baker had by far the best year of his career too. 3,500 yards and 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. A huge difference from the season before. Everything was looking up for Baker in Cleveland, and then it all came crashing down. And Baker Mayfield made one of the costliest mistakes in NFL history, playing through a torn labrum, a decision that cost him millions of dollars, his job, and his reputation. Baker suffered a shoulder injury, and instead of shutting down and undergoing surgery, he decided to play through it, and he looked like the worst version of himself we had ever seen in the pros. He threw for 3,000 yards and 17 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. Baker wasn't good enough. Really, he wasn't before the injury, but after the torn labrum, he was just bad. Cleveland had the opportunity to upgrade at the position by trading for Deshaun Watson and pulled the trigger. Other than the morality of it, it's really hard to blame the Browns for moving on from Baker. One of the biggest knocks on Baker Mayfield when he was in Cleveland was the fact that he had been surrounded by a near perfect situation in terms of pieces around him. The reality is, Baker always played behind a good offensive line. He didn't deal with much adversity when it came to pressure. Nick Chubb is one of the most talented running backs in the league, and behind him is Kareem Hunt. I mean, we all know how good he can be in the backfield or outside of a hotel room. Theoretically, he should have had a really good wide receiver core with Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. But for whatever reason, Baker just outright refused to throw to an open Odell. Cleveland was always above average on the defensive side of the ball too. Especially in his first year under Kevin Stefanski, Baker Mayfield was in a near perfect situation to succeed. He was a big, if not the biggest reason for the Browns' culture shift, but the majority of his good play on the field was heavily determined by the players around him. The reality was, Baker wasn't going to magically end up in a better situation anywhere else. Wherever he went after Cleveland, his issues were probably going to be amplified, and that's exactly what happened. That being said, Baker did only play 5 games. It's very reasonable to think that Baker Mayfield would have been better in Carolina as the season went along, but that doesn't mean it was guaranteed that he would have actually been good. There were plenty of issues on the Panthers' offensive line, and Mayfield holding onto the ball too long trying to play hero ball didn't exactly help. With some more familiarity with the line, Baker may have improved, but he definitely would have if he had more time with his wideouts. His timing was inconsistent, and the chemistry was never really there. Maybe that's a time issue, and it really didn't help that Matt Rule had Baker compete with Sam Darnold and split reps, even though everyone knew Baker was going to win the job. Now, it doesn't really matter, because it's PJ Walker's team now. It's hard to say what the future for Baker Mayfield looks like. It's hard to imagine that he's going to be a starting quarterback next season, but I mean, it could theoretically happen. Nobody's going to sign Baker Mayfield to be their guy, but I could see a team that drafts a quarterback signing Baker to be a veteran presence and maybe even start week 1 until the rookie is ready to take over. Still, it may be more likely that he has to go the Mitch Trubisky route. Trubisky fell apart in Chicago, even though he did have one flashy season. He actually has a similar story to Baker. A high draft pick, one good year, and his team decided to move on. Mitch had to opt to go to Buffalo and sit behind Josh Allen, and then after, teams were interested, like the Steelers, to see what he had learned and if he had improved. Baker might not be a top 32 quarterback in the league, but he's at least a top 64 guy. He deserves a roster spot, even if that is as a backup. A team can win with Baker Mayfield at quarterback. We know that. We literally saw it when he was in Cleveland. But if Baker is going to succeed again in the pros, it'll be because of the scheme and system built around him. Baker Mayfield's ceiling is being a system quarterback. He's not going to be the reason a team is winning games, but the hope is that he won't be the reason why you're losing. Best case scenario, Baker Mayfield somehow carves out a career like Kirk Cousins, even though I don't think he's as good as him. A guy worthy of being a starting quarterback in the NFL, but will never be one of the most talented. He does what is asked of him and can win as long as the team around him is built to win. Baker Mayfield is an easy guy to like. He fought through a lot of adversity in college, walking on at Texas Tech and winning the starting quarterback role before walking on at Oklahoma and doing the same thing en route to winning the Heisman. He turned around a Browns team that had won a single game in 2 years and then got replaced by a guy with sexual assault allegations. He may not be the most talented quarterback ever, but he's an easy guy to like. But unfortunately, it's probably over for Baker Mayfield.